Well, on my behalf, good evening. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Ivan, for accepting the invitation. I think it's the 7th time. It's the 3rd time in this format, but we also had you in the morning every year. And as the director of Presseclub Concordia says, Vienna starts with the New Year's concert, and we start with Ivan Krastev. So I'm really happy that you are here with us again. My name is Mirjana Tomić, and I curate seminars on politics and media in Europe here in Presseclub Concordia and Forum Journalismus and Medien, always supported by the ERSTE Stiftung. For the past 5, 6, 7 years, our topic is always the same: lessons from the previous year, and the outlook for the coming year. Just a very brief introduction of Ivan. He's born in Bulgaria, resident of Vienna, chair of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, and permanent fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences, IVM, in Vienna, author of many books, even more articles. And I know that a lot of you here are part of his fan club. There was even a suggestion next year in Stadthalle so that everyone can hear you. We have 30 minutes to understand the world around us with Ivan, and 30 minutes for you to ask questions, and then with the wine and snacks you can continue. Just a brief introduction. I listened to my talks with Ivan in 23 and 24, and I observed that we have been always addressing similar topics: migration, far right, Ukraine, political rupture, democracy, and our inability to fully comprehend the scope of political change around us. As you wrote, Ivan, because for the people it is very difficult to imagine something different than what they see or they know. It is interesting we never mentioned climate, and it affects all of us. In 2023, you predicted that the year 2024 would be eventful, and it was. In 24, you did not make any predictions for 25, but you said that 24 was marked by the speed of events, political ruptures, and again, our difficulty to comprehend the changes. You did predict that the war in Ukraine would get worse, and that President Trump would, and I quote you, change the nature of political discourse. You also mentioned that EU should learn to live as a middle power. I have been listening to your talks and reading your articles in 25, and you have been mentioning the word revolution over and over again. Please explain the nature of the revolution. Who is going to be affected, how, and shall we understand where are we going?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. And this is the difference with the performance which Vikram did. Pianists that basically they strive on precision. In talks like this, basically political analysts will strive on vagueness. If you see kind of, my predictions was so vague that it was not possible to be totally wrong. But for me, what is really important, and this was kind of my take on Trump, was that this is like moving somebody who have been going with a slow train, suddenly being put on a fast train. And probably we don't know the destination, but what is overwhelming is the speed. The speed is the one that is changing a lot. Imagine 2025 was the first year of the presidency of Donald Trump. Don't you have the fear that he has been running for more than a year? That a lot of things has happened and are happening. So for me, this is, when I talk about revolution, I have 3 things in mind. One is, revolution is not a change of power. Power is changing almost all the time. It is the change of the identity of the political actors. This is basically, the United States is a different political player. We can like it or dislike it, but in a period of 1 year, he managed to change the political identity of the United States as a global player. Secondly, I really believe that revolution is about speed. Things start happening very fast. And to be honest, this is also a generational. I'm coming from an East European generation that have seen a major political change in their life. change which was different in its political directions, but what I remember from this period was how fast things were changing, and not simply events, but in our head. How much certain things that were unthinkable starts to be perceived as very much almost inevitable. And the third thing which is changing is that suddenly, and this is the art of every revolution, you start to understand that future is going to be different than the way the world looks today. And in my view, it's important because I was preparing for this talk to see what the classic says about what's going to happen. So Nostradamus has a view, of course, on 2026. So he said that they're going to be a swarm of bees. Probably it's a very good news for the ERSTE group. But interpreters are talking about a kind of a major political turmoil. And because our way to talk about the future is defined by two things. First, when you talk about the future, you normally look back at the past. And the most important in any prediction is you never know what's going to happen, but you have the illusion at least that you know that certain things you believe are not going to happen. The famous kind of a joke about this is that we don't know what would have happened if it was Khrushchev and not Kennedy being killed in 1963. But one thing we know, that Onassis was not going to marry Mrs. Khrushchev. I'm saying this because, because this level of a constraint, what is disciplining our understanding about the future is very much based on the fact that there are certain things that we don't expect to happen. And these things that we don't expect to happen are the ones that are disciplining our thinking. So starting to answering about the revolution, I was part of a global survey that was done by the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is going to be announced on January 15. And here are 4 things that come. This was 21 countries, 11 European countries, and the big kind of a global South countries, but also Russia, China. And there are 4 things that are really interesting when you compare 2024 with 2025 with 2024. The first is that suddenly, in all of these places, majority of people start to expect that the next year China is going to rise. The first year of the Trump's presidency and the talk about America first suddenly ended up with China first. Suddenly, even Americans starts to believe that China, because of technology, because of manufacturing, because of trade, is going to have a rise, and this is believed majority of plurality in every single of 21 countries that we have been studying. Secondly, and even more important, not simply that these people believe that China is on rise, they are not afraid of this. Normally, in international relations, people are going to believe that when you have some kind of a new hegemon trying to come, you're going to have a normal kind of a reaction, you're backlashing against it, you're kind of creating a coalitions to contain it. This is not at least the case in our data in this kind of a survey. The third thing that importantly happened is talking about pessimism and optimism. You have 2 groups in the world. There are some countries where societies are quite pessimistic, and this is Europe, United States, South Korea, and Turkey. And there are others who are extremely optimistic. The major champion of optimism is India, but you have China, you have Brazil, Russia and Ukraine. I'm not taking very much. Nevertheless, both of them are quite optimistic because when you're in a war, you're either optimistic or you're dead. So simply you cannot allow yourself to get pessimistic. But in my view, it's very important to see is that many things that we see as a kind of a negative, gloomy, seen from other parts of the world, including Mexico that you know so well, there is quite a lot of optimism. Not necessarily optimism for the world as a whole, but optimism for their place in the world. And the fourth thing that has changed dramatically is how Europe is viewed. For the first time in the data that we have, majority of Russians believe that it is Europe and not the United States which is the major enemy of Russia. Also, interestingly enough, while President Trump became extremely negative on Europe, this is not very much shared by the Americans, which 40% of the Americans still view Europe as an ally, but only 16% of the Europeans view the United States as an ally. Listen, these are big changes if you go historically, and they're big changes happening in 1 year. So I'm saying this because normally you think about the future, not simply knowing that certain things should happen, for example, elections, so you can make predictions, and I will do it for sure about the war. But it is also very important to see certain trends that you have and how they're going to develop.
Before we go on, what do you think will happen in 26, or which trends? Which events, or what are the most important, let's say, phenomena from 2025 that will have the most durable effects? I just thought of some: personalization of power, disrespect for the rule of law, the encounter between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, or US hostility towards Europe, or the reintroduction of Monroe Doctrine.
Okay, let's start with something that you didn't mention, and basically this was the tariffs. Listen, people in this room are probably not on the trading on the market every day, but it was a major change. And interestingly enough, this major change has an effect which was very different than both its critic and its proponents expected. Many liberal economists believe that Trump's tariffs are going to produce a major rupture on the markets. To be honest, it didn't happen.
But also, at this point, do you really know the tariffs against certain countries? Because there have been so many changes that it's very difficult. You know, the Swiss brought presents, then the tariffs are lower, etc.
Listen, I don't know, but believe me, the companies that are trading, they know. And secondly, the trading is also about expectations. Even if you basically don't know exactly how this is going to change, when you're trying to plan, you're thinking about this. Because one of the problems with these rapid changes is that you cannot plan your life. This is like with inflation. Inflation, for example, is so painful for politics because it makes it very difficult for people to plan. And when you cannot plan, you became extremely nervous, you became very anxious, and it turned out that in political terms, inflation is more painful than recession, exactly because it destroys everyday expectations. And from this point of view, tariffs were important. They didn't work in the way they worked, and people are ready to adopt and adjust incredibly to what happened. When you're talking about the level of surprises, listen, the fact that in a national security strategy of the United States, basically Europe is going to be the major problem, is going to come as a surprise for everybody who has been reading the previous doctrine, the previous national security strategies. Secondly, something that was not so much commented for those of you who have not read the national security strategy, which, by the way, is a document which is worth to be read, because in a certain way it reads like a transcript of President Trump's mind. Unlike other strategies, which people are much more trying to shape his mind, here you have basically his advisors were trying to put on paper the way he sees the world. Listen, he has the right to see the world as he wants, and it's up to the United States to decide on their national security strategy. But there were three things in this strategy that were very important, and I'll start from the most surprising. There was a half a page on Africa. This should be a surprise for anybody who knows that in year 2100, 40% of the population of the world is going to come from Africa. In the year 1900, there was only 8% of the population of the world living in Africa. Back then, 25% of the world population was living in Europe. In the year 2100, only 6% of the world population is going to come from Europe. So if you have a national security strategy that is ignoring a place and the continent where the major kind of a demographic boom is going to happen, this is something. Secondly, Latin America, and of course this is critically important, people are talking about Monroe Doctrine and about sphere of influence, but what it means to be sphere of influence these days. During the Cold War, it was very clear. You're going to trade either with the Soviets or with the Americans mostly. You are going basically to have political regime that go one way or the other. Now this is not like this. Almost everybody is trading with China. Almost 50% of the industrial production of the world is coming from China. It's about something else. In my view, it's very much about technology. Tell me with whom you share data, and I'm going to tell you where your geopolitical loyalty goes from.
Yes, but one of the objectives of this new Monroe Doctrine is to stop Chinese influence in Latin America.
Listen, you can stop them, what? Taking natural resources. You can basically try to keep Chinese technologies outside of Latin America, and I'm sure that they'll try to do it. But it is not so easy. The idea of the sphere of influence is much easier when you're writing about it than when you're practicing it. And then comes the idea of Europe. And of course, here there is a big irony. So the major accusation of the American president about Europe is that it became too much Americanized. Because all the story about multiculturalism and the story about going beyond certain type of a certain type of a classical nation state, this was very much perceived in Europe as Americanization. And suddenly, basically, America discovered that it does not like Americanized Europe, we should go back. And we have been talking about this before. There is interesting, we're living in the world where everybody is a migrant. The major difference is that most of the migrants coming from out of the West, they come here in a hope that they're coming to the future. And most of the right-wing voters who are voting for parties they're voting for basically try to migrate back in time. So you have migrants in space and you have migrants of time, but basically nobody feels comfortable where they are. And for me, this is important because, as you said also, one of the interesting story about 2025 was that suddenly the American president started to behave like a monarch. Don't forget, America was created as a new world against the old world of the European monarchies. And he's doing things in a very natural way, I should say, which are going to be surprising. Listen, getting a gift, a plane from Qatar. I'm Bulgarian, to be absolutely honest. You cannot make me outraged about corruption. I know all positive things also connected about corruption, but it's about the naked power. And this is also the message that, of course, some people are more important than others. And I'm saying this because for me also, if you're going to ask me what are the most important conversations that happened in 2025, for me this was this conversation which was captured by the television camera when President Xi and President Putin were talking to each other. They didn't know that the mic was on, and they have been started talking that probably people are going to live, at least some people, till 150 years, and it's going to be about transfer of organs and so on. Listen, this is a dramatic conversation. You should imagine for a moment that you have political leaders who believe that they can live till 150. No, imagine how much it's changing your idea of power. Imagine how much, for example, is changing your idea before politicians are going to talk about their legacy. If I'm going to govern for 50 more years, all this story of legacy are dramatically changed. Secondly, of course, some people can live till 150. Could everybody live 150? Transfer of organs is not a simple thing. So suddenly we ended up in a world which starts to look like the ancient Greek mythology. You have kind of a few immortals, and you have basically a lot of mortals, and the relations between them is a totally different level of social inequality than the normal social inequality which we're talking about.
Well, let's come back to mortals, because I think it is a bit difficult to mortals and Europe. You wrote that Europe was once a peace project and it's becoming a war project, a process triggered by Putin's full-scale invasion. We are talking a lot about the war these days. Chancellor Merz said it could look, the war could look like the war that our parents and grandparents experienced. One of the French generals said, well, the young people must be prepared to die, basically. I'm paraphrasing. But at the same time, in Germany and France, according to a poll by Politico that I read this morning, 45% of the people in Germany are against increasing the level of support. In fact, they're in favor of decreasing the level of support for Ukraine, and 37% in France. As mortals, are we preparing for a war? Should we buy cans? Or should we prepare to fight? Well, at my age, not, but should young people prepare to fight? Or should we be getting the last boat and the last plane to Latin America?
That's a good story. In my view, the biggest success of the European project was that it made the war in Europe unthinkable, not in the world. So Europeans were not so naive to believe that there is not war, but it was difficult for us. It was difficult also for me to imagine a big war in Europe. Not a conflict, a big war. And what we're seeing in Ukraine is a big war. By the way, in January next year, it's going to be the date when the war of Russia against Ukraine is going to become longer than the Soviet-Nazi war of 1941-1945. Listen, this is big. Secondly, we're talking about two very big European countries. Coming from a small country, I know how difficult it is to try to imagine the maps, but we're talking about two very big countries. And as a result of it, this started to change things. But here comes the story. The fear of something has changed, the war is possible, what is the world in which we are living? And here European societies are very much divided by what is the comparison they're living with. And based on these comparisons, you're making a totally different conclusions. Do we live in 1913? Which means before World War I, and is Ukraine, Serbia, that is going basically to get us into a war. This is part of the story who said, we should not provoke, we should not go there, we should not basically get into the trap that happened, and this is the idea of the sleepwalking. And you have this reason. Some of these people, by the way, does not need to be pro-Russian to believe this. This is the fear that if we are going basically to buy much more weapons and if we are going to give much more support for Ukraine, the war is going to come even closer. The others are people who said, no, it's not 1913, it's 1939. So Ukraine is not Serbia, Ukraine and what is happening in Ukraine is Munich, and basically if you're not going to stop them now, they're going to come and they're going
What
to
do you
take
believe?
you. I don't believe it's neither 1913, 1990, 39, but this type of a story is the basic reaction of people, and these reactions, part of it is individual, but most of them are national. I have been said this before, but I believe this is one of the very few phrases that which I coined and I like for myself, is that in Europe we can have a common dreams, but our nightmares are strictly national. You cannot blame the Poles that they feel like in 1939. Because they were shaped by 1939. When the war started, ECFR was making this opinion polling, asking what you fear most. In Germany and France, the biggest fear was from a nuclear war. In Poland and the Baltic republics, from occupation. This is not the same fear. So from this point of view, I'm not going basically to say this is divide that cannot easily be breached. And all of these people can be right. The story is that if you're a government, you should try to take a position. And when you say about defense spending, listen, I have my own questions, not about defense spending for three reasons. One is, keep in mind that you can end up with a defense spending, which are not going to be popular as part of the population. As a result of it, you're going to end up with a very extreme government coming to power. You don't want to have, for example, in Germany, a lot of weapons and AfD in government. This is reasonable. I mean, this is not an illegitimate question. On the other side, to believe that, for example, people are saying, is Russia ready to do this and that? We don't know what Russia is ready or not. By the way, Russia is not a person. There is a person that takes most of these decisions. We don't know much what is in his head. But in political science, you know one thing. You're not analyzing intentions. You're analyzing capabilities. The question is not what he wants, because to be honest, we really cannot have the question. The problem is what he could. And if you believe that he could do it, you should be prepared to react on this. It's about capabilities, because as political scientists used to say, capabilities define intentions.
Yes, Ivan, but the politicians and we as mortals have to listen to what they say. The speed of their declarations, the war is coming, is increasing.
Listen, here I have a much more sympathy of anxiety that I feel in your voice. Because on one level, you try to mobilize the population. Because people are not ready to die. And to be honest, a sacrifice after 1970s, 1980s, after the end of the Cold War, it's not part of the social contract anymore. Governments don't have the feeling that they have the right from the people to sacrifice their lives. This is a major change. And by the way, this was the major success of European project. We are living in a very post-heroic societies. This is why one of the things that I'm really kind of worried about is that if you have a societies which are becoming much more aware of a growing threat, at the same time, they don't have the feeling that they can mobilize, particularly younger generation, because when you see all this opinion polling saying that people are supporting, for example, coming back to a classical mobilization army and defense spending, see who is saying yes. Mostly older generations. The people who are least enthusiastic about serving are people who are going to serve. So this is why, for example, talking about predictions, I do believe in the next 10 years we're going to see a major proliferation of nuclear weapons.
We shall see the major.
Because listen, every government he owes this to population to give certain level of defense and protection. What we are seeing, talking about 2025, our view of NATO has changed dramatically, because in Europe, and particularly in Eastern Europe, NATO has become a religion. Any type of questions about security, you're saying NATO and the conversation is over. But for those who have been reading history, there was a certain type of a religion for the French, and this was the famous Maginot Line, which was built, and basically everybody was saying this makes us totally protected. NATO is as effective as the commitment of the Americans to fight in Europe. There is no treaty that can defend you. The only thing that can defend you is the readiness of your major security partner to be part of it. And in the time of Donald Trump, you cannot be sure. By the way, I don't know is he going to come or not to come, but you cannot take it for granted. And particularly if you're going to see the reduction of the American presence in Europe, keep in mind that one of the reasons the Americans, we believed, are going to come is that there was a lot of American kids on the German territory, on the Polish territory, and they're going to also defend their own. So from this point of view, suddenly, for the first time, Europeans are forced to try to imagine defense of Europe in the absence of the Americans, particularly when you talk not to a kind of a nuclear total war, but when you're talking about quite aggressive provocation, particularly when it comes to some of the small countries, particularly the Baltics and others. And this is a different world. So when I was saying that it is a war project, it's not simply that you start to imagine that war is possible, but you're trying to imagine the war in which the Americans are not coming. And this is so different for people who have been professionally doing this. This is like somebody changing your map of the world.
I understand, but do you have any vision of this European strategy when Americans don't come? Or if Americans do not come? Do you think Europe has a strategy? Or it's strategy as we go?
Let's do something. You can have a strategy. Everybody have a strategy. Strategy is a document. What we don't know is what people will do, how institutions are going to react. And don't forget, now we are seeing certain things and we believe that it cannot be different. So now everybody was talking the way the Ukrainians reacted when the Russians basically invaded in February 2022. And we believe that it could not be different, and we are basically making jokes about the assumptions of the Russians. But you never know. They did it, what they did. It does not mean that it could not have been different. How people are going to react in a moment of an extreme crisis, you cannot easily predict. And in my view, this is important. And this way, reading opinion poll, when it comes how people are going to behave in a moment of war, don't believe it. I'm going to give you the Ukrainian data from 2021. 25% were very skeptical about the government. Many of the people were saying that almost this is as if this is not a country that can defend itself. And then comes the moment you have a leader, because it's not also coming automatically, and these people risk their life, they volunteered, they went, and they're fighting for 4 years, a much bigger country with a much bigger army, with a much bigger economy. So there is a psychological moment that you cannot easily predict, and this is not in any strategy. And this is, historically, we know it. You cannot, this is the thing that you cannot predict. I'm sure that Europe is going to put much more when it comes to defense capabilities. Here the problem is who decides what kind of weapons you need. Normally in the American case, this is the Pentagon. They're going to tell the companies, we need drones or we need planes. Because the other thing that is changing dramatically is the very nature of the war. Suddenly, in Europe, I do believe we're slightly in a moment in which defense companies decide what to produce. Because you don't have European army, you don't have one government that can go with this. So all these are important stories, but psychologically, something has changed. For the Europeans, it is much easier than ever before to imagine that their own countries can be part of a big conflict. And when you said, and you can take the boat to Latin America, the other thing that has happened is where to go. Imagine that you have a major crisis now, and in this city, some decades ago, there was a lot of people asking these questions, where to go? And normally people say, go to America, and now you cannot be sure. And there are many other places in the world. So suddenly, Europe is the place where you feel the crisis, but seen from outside, it is also the most prosperous and, in a way, most stable place. So this paradox is there. It's not easy to go anywhere.
I just want to return to this psychological part. Are we learning to live with the wars and the far right that is approaching power as something normal? Is it like the wolf is coming, and we don't think the wolf will really come?
I do believe that a certain period, very exceptional period of history, we make the look as normality. Not having a war, and in Europe it was particularly in Western Europe, almost outside of Yugoslavia, 8 years was not how the world have been functioning before. As a famous military historian used to say, he said, war is as old as the world, but peace is a modern invention. Because peace is not
but we have media now, and we see the wars in real time. It's a bit different.
Listen, I don't know what exactly we are seeing, because we are so much overloaded with different type of materials and cruelty and so on, that we are seeing, but almost everything that we are seeing is out of context. We are very much bombarded with images, and some of these images are shattering. But this is one thing to have this, is totally different to try to imagine yourself in a war. By the way, the war is not what is happening only on the battlefield. At the moment, in most of Ukraine, particularly all of Eastern Ukraine, you have electricity 6 to 12 hours per day. You cannot imagine, if this is going to be constantly, how this is changing your life. For example, the problem of the break in sleep. Imagine that you have basically all these bombing attacks, and you should try to get, you should have to go to the shelters almost every night with your family. this is not a war. You're not on the front line. By the way, the risk to be killed is not particularly high, but this is changing your way totally. Just keep this, try for 1 month to be sure that at 12 o'clock every night you're getting out, you're waking up and you're spending 4 hours somewhere and coming back. And this is already a different world. And then your imagination is changing dramatically. And the same thing that you're seeing differently. So this is not a television. You cannot see this on television. Because television you can switch it off. I was always, I remember there was this beautiful old film about a guy who was spent all his life, he was a gardener, just watching television and doing his garden, and all the time he was playing with his remote control. And once he went on the street and he was attacked by the hooligans, and he tried all the time to change the channels, but it didn't work. To be honest, from time to time I have the feeling that Europe is slightly in a position of this gardener. When you see kind of a major crisis, we simply try to change the channel. But it's not a television, we're on the street.
Well, I will open for questions, but what do you expect in 2026? Now we are in this incredible speed. We may even fall out of the train if the speed gets bigger. What do you expect for 2026 here in Europe?
I'm going to focus just on 3 things. I expect that we are going to have certain type of a ceasefire in Ukraine in one way or the other. Probably not now when they were expected, but probably later. But this ceasefire can have a very different contours. And for Europe, it's going to be very different, because if it's going to be a type of a dirty peace that Ukrainians basically are going not to buy, then you're going to have a major crisis of migration and movement of people to Europe, and people who are going to come are not going to be wives and children. And having a wave of ex-soldiers coming to Europe with the political kind of dynamics that we have in our own countries is going to be an issue, a big issue. But I don't believe that we can keep the same intensity of fighting for the whole 2026. Secondly, the Hungarian elections in April are going to be, March, April is going to be critically important for Europe because of many reasons. Hungarian government are very important in this new political constellation in Europe, where President Trump has made very clearly that he has certain political preferences and political friends. And Mr. Orban is not simply the oldest friend, but he's, in my view, the most strategic on their side. So if he's going to win the elections, this is going to create a certain consolidation on part of this kind of a Trumpian right in Europe. This is going to have an effect in other countries. If he's going to lose, and this of course is going to be one of the irony of history, is that if he's going to lose, Orban is going to lose in the Orban moment of Europe, when other kind of a far right. But history is famous for its sense of humor, so we should not be underestimating this. But this is going to be very important elections. In a certain way, really important elections, because don't forget that a lot of intellectual, financial, institutional infrastructure of the European far right is in Hungary. The major relations of European far right, for example, with the American MAGA movement and so on, goes through Hungarian channels. So this is very, very important elections, and they can go both ways.
Before you go on the third, just a follow-up, which do you think that the US or Russia have more influence or bigger influence for the coming elections in Europe? Who can be more important?
It depends on the countries, but I do believe the United States. And the third is American midterm elections. American midterm elections are not so much going to change much in the United States, but if the Democrats are going to win big, which means that if President Trump is going to look weak, then the major story is how the European Trumpian right is going to decide what is their strategy. Because listen, we are risking now with highly polarized United States every change of an American president to become a regime change in Europe. Republicans coming and basically pushing in a very strong anti-liberal move, and then you Democrats coming and going against the far right. And probably at this moment, I do believe we can have a major renegotiations within the European political parties, including with the far right. Is there some European consensus? Is there something that we can agree on about the role of Europe in the world and the strategic relations with the United States, regardless of who is in power in the US? Listen, this is an opportunity. It can work or not. Part of the story is that our politics became so polarized that almost there is no external threat that can consolidate us. This is what you see in many countries, starting with Poland. But I do believe that these three things, the prospect of a certain type of a ceasefire, I'm not going to say peace in Ukraine, Hungarian elections that can go both ways, and on the other side, what is going to be the impact if Trump is going to look much weaker, not so much what is going to impact on the United States, but what is going to be the impact on the calculations of different political parties and political leaders in Europe. In my view, these are three things that we should look for. But here comes the most important thing. I'm sure that the most important thing about 2026 is something that we're not talking today about. Because also psychologically, normally we are seeing best what we do not expect to see. If you're preparing to see something, nevertheless, how it will go, you're never going to be surprised. And this is the surprise and very much the unexpected that is, to a great extent, shaping political reality.
Thank you. Questions? I see one hand in the back. Go ahead and please introduce yourself. There is a microphone.
Thank you, dear Ivan. My name is Ina Bereskina. I've been a fellow this year at IVM. I have a very simple question to you. First of all, thank you for the enlightenment. The question is, do you see the today's international architecture sliding all the way down, or is there a chance to bounce back to sort of the system that was shaped up as a result of the Second World War? Or is there any chance you can see a rise of a new social contract, a new system, new international architecture?
I believe the post-Cold War European order is over. In a straight way, I do believe the 20th century is over. Our view of the world was very much based on the lessons of the 20th century, particularly of our generations. But 20th century is not there anymore because the lessons of the 20th century suddenly are becoming irrelevant for many players, and also because for many of the younger generation, this is kind of a very ancient history. If you see, and this is the best seen in Germany, every crisis of the world today is becoming the crisis of the Germans' post-World War II identity. Be it German tanks in Ukraine, being Israel and Gaza, what is happening, basically the commitment to the Germans, to the Israelis, regardless of what they do, be it German economic model. So from this point of view, I don't believe that we're going to be back where we are. Secondly, I never believe that when something is kind of passing away, everything is destroyed. One of the interesting stories is that this is like with the power of buildings and the power of streets. If you see the electoral Poland, the electoral map of Poland, and see how they vote on the elections, you're going to see that on the Polish elections, there is a very strong correlations with which part, to which empire different parts of Poland belonged. And those who have been the German part, they vote always most liberal, and parts that have been part of the Russian Empire, they vote more conservative. But here's the paradox. All these people who live in the Western Poland are Poles from Eastern Poland that have been removed after World War II because the Germans have been expelled. So you should expect that they should vote in the way their relatives who are still living in East Poland vote. But they started to live in the houses of this Western Poland. They start going on the streets and so on, and they vote in the way probably these Germans were going to vote if they have been still living there. I'm saying this because they're mainly major things which are surviving. They're surviving because of the way we're socialized. They're surviving because certain institutions are going to survive. But what is going to disappear are the major assumptions on which this world have been built. And I do believe we should be prepared for this. And there is no international order that has survived forever. And on this, there was these expectations that I'll be very much gloomy. Listen, gloomy in comparison with what? I was reading somebody saying, this is a shaking times, and the shaking is universal. This is a statement made by an English priest in 1643. It was true then, probably it's true today. In a strange way, we should have also much more of a historical perspective. I do believe that many things around us, things that we have been very accustomed to, are going to change dramatically. By the way, we cannot change anything for granted. If you're going to ask me, do I can predict, is European Union in the way we know it around in the next 10 years is going to be there? I'll tell you, I don't know. It's too long period to say this. If you're going to ask me this type of questions, but it does not mean that everything is simply going to disappear. And because I know well, listen, even after the end of the Cold War, many of the things, reflexes of the Cold War survived. Many of the attitudes survived. Then we didn't like it. Now probably we're going to like that some of the post-Cold War world is going to be preserved, but we should be ready for radical changes, and we should be ready that it's not going to be easy to know where to go if we decide to run away.
More questions here. Maribel, please. Yeah, and then Clemena.
Thank you. Great.
Introduce yourself.
Maribel Königer from ERSTE Foundation, so I like the B thing, so that was great. No, you said, Ivan, that it's not predictable how people will react in a big crisis. But actually, a few years ago only, we had a big crisis worldwide. Sorry. And probably more people died than in the war in Ukraine and Russia, globally at least, in that time. And if I look at the people in this not seen situation since the Spanish flu 100 years earlier, my analysis was that at the very beginning and in the main part of this whole super crisis, most of the people were super cooperative, did their best, helped others, get vaccinated, etc., etc. And of course, there was then a counter movement, and some of them got on my nerves. But we didn't have a civil war about it. Honestly, it was something big and not easy. But I would say that even in post-heroic times, you could expect that people try to preserve what they want to preserve. How do you think?
Let me take one more question. Clemena?
I wanted to go back to what you said at the very beginning, this sense of a revolution, and that you have a sense of accelerated speed. And I think that if you look at the American case, this was very, very obvious in the first few months when Donald Trump came to power, because he kept saying he's going to stop the war in Ukraine before he goes into office on the first day or the first 24 hours. He didn't do it. In a way, there are many things he said he would do which he didn't do. At the same time, I think that one of the important things he did is that there is a sense that a lot of things that were kept quiet, he said aloud. And I think that once certain things are said aloud, language can no longer, or at least the language we have spoken so far, cannot remain as powerful. And it is the people who have this sense that actually manage to succeed in what they do. And just to give an example, the new mayor of New York, I don't follow American politics very much, but I think it was very impressive. You had these 10 people standing on stage, and each one of them was asked, which is the first country you would visit, foreign country? What a strange question for someone who's becoming a mayor of a city. One after the other, they said what they were expected to say, Israel. And then it came to the person who became mayor. I don't even remember his name. But he completely changed the terms of the discussion. And he said, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll stay in New York and I'll take care of the problems of people in New York. So this for me shows that it's people like that, politicians like that, who realize that the old language that we're so used to, language of values and all the rest of it, just doesn't work anymore. And in a way, Donald Trump made it impossible for that kind of language to work. So that's my question.
Yeah, let's start with Clemena. You're touching on something that I very much agree with. In order to be successful today, you should transgress. You should break rules. You can break in one way or the other. And this was important about Trump. And in a certain way, you are seeing this in almost every political society. Before, if you run for politician, you are going to claim that you have experience. Today, if you're seeing, for example, the students in Serbia claim that they're not going to put on their list anybody who ever was a member of a political party. So in a certain way, you go for total breaks. It's normal to believe that you need an experience to govern, and then this experience is turning against you because politics has become like this famous children's game of truth or dare. You are ready to listen to somebody only if she or he is breaking the rules. If she or he are ready to take certain risk. Because what is rewarded is even not so much the political message, but the risk. When you're saying that I'm not going to do what everybody is doing, you're taking a risk. And the risk is becoming so important. And this has also something to do with COVID. Like Maribel, I do believe COVID is very important. This is where the big change started. We are trying to forget it in the same way. The Spanish flu was forgotten. By the way, in Spanish flu, probably more people died than during the World War I. But if you see on the number of literature that have been written, there are 80 times more books written about World War I than about Spanish flu, because there is no story there. There was no kind of this arbitrary nature of death. Is making very difficult to tell the story. There is no sacrifice, there is no hero, there is no villain, simply people are dying. But what happened during COVID, at least in my view, was something very important. What I started with, certain things that you believed that were impossible became possible. And I'm just going to give you, this is always my kind of a famous, favorite example. Imagine that you're a climate activist. And you hate planes because they're incredibly polluting. And all your life you have been dreaming that all planes be landed in the same day. You dream about it, but you don't believe it is possible. And it happened. Or imagine that you are a right-wing activist. And all your life you have been dreaming that all European borders are going to be closed in the same day. And you're dreaming about this, but you don't believe it is possible. And it happened. So suddenly, many things that were perceived as impossible happened, and this is what changing your understanding of politics. Yes, people are much more civilized, and by the way, the fact that our societies are aging is one of the reasons that people are more satisfied. One of the reasons that you have diminished crimes in many of European societies, the average age. The higher is the average age, the lower is the crime levels. You need young people to do crimes. I'm saying this because, of course, all these characteristics of societies are critically important, but during COVID, there was also the things that I found particularly impressive, and in my view has to be a lesson for Europe, also for the world in which we're living. I never had a strong knowledge or view on the lockdowns, is it good or bad? But I was extremely impressed by Sweden. But not impressed in technical terms that they were right, but that they dared to do something that nobody else was doing. Can you imagine in a moment like this to take the responsibility? Because there is a very well-known literature about uncertainty. And in the moment of uncertainty, if you're a government, basically you did what others do. Because you don't know what to do, and by doing what everybody is doing, you're reducing the risk of being accused of taking a wrong position. And if you look, for example, in March and April 2020, from the moon, you are never going to understand which country was democracy and which was authoritarian regime in the world, because everybody was doing the same. And then come the Sweden, and they said, we are different, and we're going to do something different. I don't know how successful they were in a medical term, but I do believe politically, this kind of a daring to say we are different is probably something that Europe needs today in this world. Because listen, President Trump can take 1 million Mexicans, go to the Mexican border and tell them go home. And it's going to be awful, but it's technically doable. I don't advise anybody to come on the Bulgarian-Turkish border in order to return people to Turkey. I'm not sure the Turks are going to be particularly excited. So from this point of view, the asymmetrical relations between the United States and their neighbors is very different than the position of Europe with respect to many of its neighbors. So you cannot copy policies, but it's not easy to be different. And I do believe this is why this kind of a daring is very important.
More questions?
Well,
Here,
yeah.
and then behind. The young man. No, it was, oh.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have two questions. They're slightly connected. One about the social contract you were talking about in terms of sacrifice and the willingness to die for your country as an idea. I'm curious whether you think that the technological change in which people are much more likely to be busy with themselves and very inward-looking and quite narcissistic, let's say, definition of the self, contributed to the fact that they're less willing to have a collective identity and less willing to exercise sacrifice for a collective identity, and whether you see any connection between technology and that change. And the second question, also connected to technology, is whether in those changes you were describing, do you see a chance that there will be an anti-technological move in terms of people seeking more real communication with other humans or more fear of actual interaction that will lead to more isolation?
Thank you. Let me take one more. Catherine? And then you? Here.
Katrin Kalver, German journalist. I talked to Gegli Karacan the other day, the mayor of Budapest, about the Hungarian elections that are coming up, and you were talking about that too. And he said, liberal democracies are dead. And if you go into an election campaign, you tell people you want to save liberal democracies, you will lose. The only thing you can do is try to be a populist, not even talk about democracy, talk about inflation, talk about quality of life, but you have to be a good populist. Do you think that's even possible?
Thank you. And one more here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Louis Bruno, and I'm with the European Democracy Consulting Stiftung. I would very much like to save liberal democracy, so hope is not dead on that front. I like you mentioning the US national security strategy. I was writing about this recently, and among my contentions were the fact that in the shadow of it was the fact that the US seems to drastically want allies against China. I see a fear of China. Of course, this is Transamerica, so not allies as much as vassals and subordinate allies, perhaps. And another one was that there is some criticism that is well-founded about the quality of European democracy. And certainly, if we want to be a strong Europe in this world, we need to be a proper democracy, which we are not, at least at the European level. Then you say, it is important, in order to be successful, to do things differently. So my question is, for the outlook of 2026, what's more likely? that European leaders will dare to do something different by saying, we will come together, we will make a real European democracy, or that far-right parties, as they often say, will come and say, you know, to hell with the established order, and we're doing things differently, vote for us, and that will work.
Let's start with this technology question, which is an incredibly important question because killing and dying has changed dramatically. If you try, around 50% of the people that have been killed in 2025 in the Russian-Ukrainian war have been killed by drones. If you're basically seeing from the point of the operators of the drones, this looks like a video game. In a certain way, both dying and killing is not the same. And what the military experts said, that there are periods of time in which the defensive weapons develop faster than offensive weapons, and we're just in the opposite period. Now offensive weapons basically develop much faster. It's very easy to get some of these technologies which are making basically killing very easy. And here comes the problem of the sacrifice. As I said, Ukrainians in the beginning of the war basically have been volunteering, people that you don't expect at all, people coming from a very artistic circles, musicians which have never been interested in war and so on, were one of the first to volunteer. On the same time, for the last 1 year, we have around 160,000 people deserting, not from the front line, but from the training camps. Why? Because they don't know exactly how basically victory looks like today. People are not simply always ready to die. People want to die when they basically try to understand what they can achieve for whom, and so on. And this problem of the meaning, the war has been changing human societies more than any other activity, much more than art, much more than politics, because it is the problem of meaning. Then you decide what is important for me, what is not important, what I'm ready to do. And it creates a level of solidarity that you cannot create in any other conditions. When people today is making comparison with the 1920s and 1930s, probably something common, but keep in mind, all of the people in these societies were ex-soldiers, all young men. They're coming from the front, they have been killing, they have been risking being killed. It's a totally different type of society. I very much believe that with the advance of the technology, we are going to have this demand for different type of human relations. And this kind of a technological fear that we are not human anymore, what makes us human, all this talk about artificial intelligence and so on, it is pushing even the fact that people are coming in this room. Normally you can listen to Vikram on Spotify, but you're not coming because you cannot listen, but because probably you want to be with other people, you want to talk about this. This is different. And in my view, this is changing, and the war is changing, and all these people who are doing this, how exactly it's going in all directions. I don't believe it's going to be only in one direction. You're also going to have all these people who are now staying with their drones and with their computers. There is a colleague of us, Natalia Gumenyuk, a Ukrainian journalist, who is writing a book about people who are making drones. And we're talking about these sophisticated drones. You're going to be surprised how many of them are not engineers. For example, you have rap musicians, you have different, so everything has changed, in my view, dramatically on this. And going about liberal democracy. Listen, liberal democracy is a democracy in which the rights of the minorities are respected. And Dani Rodrik, a famous Harvard economist, Turkish origin, once made an observation which I find very important. He said, what is liberal democracy? This is the right property rights, the right of the majority to govern, and the rights of the minorities. Two of these rights are easy because they're major power behind them. When we talk about the property rights, this is the rights of the most powerful group of societies, and they know how to defend it. When we talk about the right of the majority to govern, listen, people are very critical towards democracy, but tell them that they're not going to elect their leaders and they're not going to be enthusiastic. The only problem is under what conditions people are ready to defend the rights of minorities, different type of minorities. And this was a kind of the genius of liberal democracy, allowing, and this is very important, when you're winning, not to win much, but when you're losing, not to lose everything. And what I do believe is changing now is, if you talk to some people on the far right, they said we're there to save democracy. By the way, when the President Biden started his campaign and he asked Americans to vote for him in order to save democracy after that, after the elections, there was opinion polling asking many of the Republicans why they voted for Trump, and they said to save democracy. We're in a situation in which everybody is saving democracy, and there's so many saviors that basically democracy cannot survive. Because the basic problem of democracy is that, and on this, I could be wrong, but I have a very strong opinion. Democracy cannot function under two conditions: when the stakes are too low or too high. If when you are changing government, nothing really is changing, after a certain period of time, people are pissed off. People want change, and this change is not delivered, and they're ready to vote for anybody just to get change. But democracy also cannot work if when you're changing a government, everything is changing. If you're going to lose your, basically, freedom, if you're going to use your property. So as a result of it, when the stakes are very low, it does not work. But when the stakes are very high, you don't need ballots, you need bullets. And this is the risk of democracy becoming a civil war with ballots when you have this type of existential threats on both sides. So paradoxically, I do believe that we should slightly also try to de-dramatize the situation. Because, listen, there were different parties coming. Do you remember how the Greens came into the German politics? This was the end of the world. They were perceived as totally radical. They're going to destroy everything. Basically, Joschka Fischer was the end of the world. And then you try to socialize it. On the far right, not every party is the same. And this is important, and this comes to the Hungarian example where I'm going to end up. Listen, I'm not buying this, and I know the mayor of Budapest, and we have friends and so on. But when people lose elections, they start to believe that democracy works only for the populists. Losing elections is not fun. But in a certain way, for sure, when you talk to the voters, you should talk about things that are interesting for them. You cannot go with the abstract story, but what people were mobilized in Hungary these days about, it was not only about economic issue. This was how people, particularly young kids, have been mistreated in some of the orphanages. There is a moral sense of justice. People, strangely enough, I'm Bulgarian, you know, we have every 6 months an elections. For the last 4 years, we have 7 elections. We have a very successful protest with hundreds, thousands of people on the street. And they didn't go for economic issues, but they have the feeling that certain kind of a line have been crossed. And I do believe that this still exists. And crossing a line is important. But where probably the mayor of Budapest is right is artificial intelligence is going to change dramatically how the election campaigns goes. Believe me, in 2 or 3 years, you are never going to be able to understand, do you communicate with another human being, or do you communicate basically with artificial intelligence? And this is not about just giving you simple messages. You're going to see for 1 year, for 2 years, somebody staying in a constant communication with you and trying to change your views of how you're voting, because now it's going to be very cheap. And this is going to change, in my view, policy much more than anything else.
Last round of questions, I can take 2. Yeah, I see a hand in the back. And then I see here the second hand, and we close.
Yeah, I'm Arthur, a Viennese student, and I wanted to ask on the demographic change in Africa and on the shift of sub-Saharan Francophone countries towards China and Russia, and how do you even think that that will change our European economy? Thank you.
Thank you. And there was one more hand here, up front, here, in the 3rd row. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah Waring from Eurozine. I'd like to follow up on what you started to uncover about artificial intelligence. And considering that at the moment a lot of people are in love with the tool, that it makes things easier or more fun, it's entertainment at times. When is there going to be a backlash of those who recognize that their jobs are going to be lost to this technology? Are we going to see this soon, next year, or further down along the line?
Thank you very much. First, thank you to Arthur for the question. I'm not a great expert on Africa, so what I'm going to tell you is very much on the basics that I have read, and you should talk to somebody that really knows much more. But one of the major things that countries like China and Russia, and they're doing two totally different things. China is basically a building infrastructure. And their message to the Africans is, we are not exploiting you because this road is going to stay with you regardless of what we are doing. In a strange way, they're doing what the West normally did in 1950s. As a result of it, they're also going for their natural resources, and they're coming with a certain type of surveillance techniques. Russians are providing something very simple, protection to the leaders. At the end of the day, Wagner Group is a big private security company that is doing something that no Western government can do, killing everybody who comes closer to this African leader and basically makes demand on them. The story is that in Africa, on European side, neither we have a legitimacy to do certain things because of history, nor, in my view, we understand much what is happening with the societies which are very different than ours, because when you come with a society with an average age of 40-something, and you go to a society with an average age of 14, it is not easy to understand. But I do believe that Africa is one of the places that if we Europeans are not going to understand, we're going to have a big problem. And interestingly enough, do you know which is the country that has most embassies in Africa? It's not China, and it's not United States, and for sure it's not European Union. It's Turkey. And this is the other things that basically probably we should try to learn, with whom you want to enter certain type of areas. And then coming to the story of artificial intelligence, another area in which my expertise is very limited, but recently the American Senate come with a report claiming that in the next 10 years, 100 million jobs are going to be lost. And they went sector by sector. I hope that they're not accountants in the room, because there was a claim that 74% of all accounting jobs in the United States are going to be cut. I'm saying this because, and for me politically, this is critically important, most of the jobs are going to be university degree jobs. It's kind of our jobs. And this is in history, we do not have a precedent for losing this kind of jobs on such a level. And it goes against the major kind of a promise of modernity. The major promise of modernity was education. Go, study, get educated, and you're going to live well. And suddenly, go, study, and then basically artificial intelligence is going to steal your job. And I'm saying this because, for example, for the generation of my kids, the word stenographer does not have a meaning. But remember, just some decades ago, this was a very desired jobs. And many, for example, particularly young girls in the beginning of the 20th century believes that becoming stenographers is their way to a better life and better societies. We can end up with this happening. New jobs are also going to be created. And here comes the psychological trick on which probably I should stop is, in my view, in a moment like this, the real kind of a trick is not to think about what you're losing, but try to imagine what you can gain. And if you're going to change this, it does not mean that you're not going to lose your job, but at least basically the end of your job is not going to be your end. You're going to have an idea that something else, probably more interesting and more beautiful, can happen. And probably for many people, this is going to happen in 2026.
Thank you for being. And Ivan, I promise you, we shall invite you next year, in spite of artificial intelligence. We shall not substitute you. And please
You
have a
can invite me, but you don't know who's going to come.
Please have a drink, and Ivan will stay. And I hope you have lots of thoughts right now, and you'll have great conversations. Thank you so much for coming.